Welcome to the Path of Exile Meta Report for Affliction Week 1. Today, we're going to get into which league starters have been coming out as the biggest winners and losers of a patch, along with some new and upcoming builds to look out for, and then get into the currency section, where we take a look at the league mechanic and how you should be farming it. As always, if you want to keep up with these, and especially if you want to see what awesome builds come out as the meta develops, then do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, and for now, let's head into the first topic. The biggest winners and losers of Affliction League starters. So here we have Affliction League Day 1, and it's 28% Deadeye. So, safe to say that Deadeye is a big winner. But who's a big loser? Well, let's take a look at things at Day 3 in Trial of the Ancestors, just to get a little point of comparison. So Deadeye, still pretty darn good. Not as high, but pretty darn good. And actually, most of the things down here are pretty much similar. So in terms of ascendancies, we're not seeing all that many shifts. The most notable occurs in the top 5 here. During Ancestor, you have Deadeye, Elementalist, Pathfinder, Saboteur, Inquisitor, with Juggernaut just edging out of the top 5. In Affliction, on the other hand, you have Deadeye, Pathfinder, Guardian, Elementalist, Champion. So Guardian and Champion are kind of big winners here, but it's still not that drastic. Realistically, Saboteur is probably fine despite the 3% play rate. The same cannot be said for builds though, and that's what we're here to talk about. So, Lightning Arrow Deadeye is number 1. It's been a great time to play a bow build, and if you've never played one, well, you should probably get on that because there's a good chance that bows are going to be nerfed into the ground. Then we've got Summon Raging Spirit Guardian, largely responsible for Guardian being as high as it is. Now, personally, I've said that Summon Raging Spirits is really strong for a long time, and it's kind of slowly crept up in the meta. Now we're seeing it absolutely dominate, which is where it deserves to be. Tornado Shot is a very surprising one. Usually, you'd need to be really rich or playing in a group to play Tornado Shot on League Start. With all the changes, and especially the Wildwood Ascendancies, there's been a lot of people going Tornado Shot earlier than before. It doesn't hurt that this is a really good league for magic finding. We've got Bone Shatter, Artillery Blister, which is used by LATS, Detonate Dead, always a fairly reliable choice. Some Vol skills, Explosive Arrow of course, Toxic Rain. Here's where it gets something interesting, Splitting Steel. A skill that was reworked to no longer require steel shards is now actually part of a meta. And it's been a really long time since steel skills were meta. Part of it is, you can get new Spectres for +1 Impale, you can get Charms for +1 Impale. It's a very good time to play a steel build. Part of it is, the skill's just a lot better than it used to be. Now, of course, new skills, the Transfigure Gems, are going to be underrepresented on Day 3. But I wanted to call out Scourge Arrow of Menace, because even on Day 3, it was at 2% play rate, and pretty much still just edging right into that top 10. So, if you're looking for a powerful build, it's definitely one to watch. More on that in a little bit, though. Now, I want to quickly come here to Ancestor League to talk about the moment that we've maybe been waiting for, which is the biggest losers. Which league starters were successful in Ancestor, but have not really been successful in Affliction, and why? So first up, Hex Blaster's gone way down. Traps and Mines got nerfed, and this is more of a mapping league than a bossing league. The build is still fine, you can still absolutely play it, but there's less reasons to do so than before, hence the lower popularity. Righteous Fire also went way down and has been bumped out of the top 10. In fact, there's probably about 1/10 of the number of people playing it, maybe 1/5 at most. This is because Righteous Fire was significantly reworked and it's way less League Start friendly than before. If you know what you're doing, you can do it. But it's gone from Righteous Fire is one of the best choices you have on League Start to you are League Starting Righteous Fire because you really want to play Righteous Fire, not because it's a generically good idea. We also have Spark. Spark lost Proj Speed, which, regardless of its endgame viability or total damage when fully scaled, makes it feel absolutely god-awful in the early game. I used to tell people all the time, Spark's a really good early skill, especially if you need a spell, let's say you're starting Inquisitor. Now, I would not recommend Spark. It's the sort of thing where you level as something else and swap in the endgame, which is really unfortunate because I don't feel like it warranted the early game nerf. And last up, Cold Dot. The build I played last league was Cold Dot, and it worked really well as a starter. It was my fastest time through the acts in a really, really, really long time. This is in part because Vortex dealt damage passively. You put it on left click, you walk near enemies, Vortex would cast, and those enemies would die. Unfortunately, what that resulted in was, well, things being a little too OP. And so, sadly, Vortex is no more. I'd also like to put an honorable mention out for Frost Blades, which got hit by the nerf to Heat Shiver. Now, I do think damage-wise Vortex is fine, it just, like Spark, feels terrible to play. Frostblades is also probably fine. It did lose about a third of its damage, I'm pretty sure. So it's maybe not the best thing to start, even if it scales into the endgame well enough that you're totally okay. So hopefully that explains a little bit about some of the skills who made it into the top meta during Trial of the Ancestors, and are completely missing in Affliction. Now that we've taken a look at the meta as a whole, let's dive into a few examples of characters people actually played. And this time, instead of trying to find something average, I'm going to look for something particularly interesting. So first up, taking a look at someone who should be a little bit familiar, Havoc's character from Day 3. Now, it goes without saying that Havoc is a better player than most people, myself included. He's way better than I'm ever going to be at Path of Exile. This isn't exactly an average character, but I wanted to look at his because he's making some really good choices, which I wanted to highlight. So, your bow is of course the source of your damage. Ideally, you want a spine bow. You want elemental damage prefixes, but you shouldn't get too hung up on things. As you can see, his suffixes are really bad. Early on, that's fine, because you can always recraft the suffixes later. And if you want to know more about how to make your first bow as Lightning Arrow or Tornado Shot, a link to a video guide that I made up in the card and down below. You can watch it after this. Something else I wanted to highlight is his rings. He's using 2 uniques. The Taming offers a lot of elemental damage with very little investment. You really just have to be able to inflict ailments on enemies. If you do, then per freeze, shock, or ignite, you get 20% increased damage with hits. You also get all res, and elemental damage with attack skills. It's an incredibly efficient item. Unfortunately, it doesn't have life on it. But early on, you'd only get crafted life anyway, and we're talking about a Lightning Arrow Deadeye. At 3.8k, slight misspeak there, he's still doing totally fine. Then for his other ring, he's got Death Rush, which feels incredible. Getting Adrenaline on kill super helps out with your mapping. It gives you speed, it gives you damage, it gives you defenses, everything you could want. Plus it has life on kill, which if you're just mapping, and let's be honest, you're not going to play Lightning Arrow Deadeye as your league starter. If you're like, I want to make a dedicated boss killer, or if you do, please seek professional help. But this is a great item. And so these are a couple uniques that are relatively affordable and super awesome. Shadow and Dust is also relatively affordable and also super awesome, because now he has Rampage for even more speed and damage. Because of the danger of a league mechanic, you really want to be clearing quickly wherever possible. So this is an absolutely excellent combination of some basic uniques by Havoc. He's also using double Inspired Learning. You got to get all those buffs from the enemies you can. And a Fulgurite Tincture for all damage can shock. Stacking those bigger shocks up with Lightning Arrow and, getting extra damage from your Storm Rain as a result is a great way to enhance your DPS, especially early on. Long term, you'll probably hit hard enough without it, but for now, it's pretty darn good. And it's a great way to show off the Magi Ascendancy. Next up, we have an SRS Guardian, who's using some awesome tech that I wanted to talk about. Are some of these examples picked from people wearing the coolest unique items? Yes, absolutely, because they're finding ways to apply them that are really cool and interesting. So, for your weapon, it's pretty simple. You want minion stats. Minion attack speed, minion accuracy, all that stuff. Trigger helps automate your extra stuff. Then, coming over to the helmet, ideally you want minion gems, but if you can't get that, grab a little Suppress. Suppress feels really awesome early on. So you'll see a lot of Guardians wearing evasion gear. You'll also see a lot of people with empty shoes for the 30% move speed from Magi, your Wildwood Ascendancy. And if you want to know more about Wildwood Ascendancies, I have a video which you can watch after this. But for a reason I wanted to talk about this build, number one, Profane Proxy, really cool tech on the Guardian. You're not really going to need to worry too much about the Chilling Aura anyway, because SRS kind of inflicts dead on enemies, and dead is better than chilled anyway. But this is a great way to get your curse always applied as long as things are near you. And you kind of want things to be near you to be in the auras from Unwavering Crusade anyhow. They're also wearing Defiance of Destiny, an awesome amulet that I feel like slipped under the radar last league. It gives a powerful effect of 32% of missing unreserved life gets recovered before being hit by an enemy. What this means is, if 32% of your missing unreserved life is bigger than the hit you're about to take, that hit never happened. Maybe it even healed you. Therefore, you are much, much tankier at low investment. Something else that's really important with Summon Raging Spirit, not just on Guardian, is get Abyssal Jewels. As many as you can get. You really want these for the damage. SRS has incredibly good damage scaling. Therefore, you want to make sure to get as many Abyssal Jewels as you can. This includes potentially wearing gear with Abyssal sockets. If you're not socketing any normal gems into your gear for Magi for the move speed, you can still socket Abyssal Jewels because jewels are not gems. So that's something else to consider as you scale your character if you're playing SRS or planning to. The tree is pretty much what I would expect, as are the skills. Honestly, if you want to know more about SRS Guardian, it's probably better to read the guide over at Maxwell rather than hear me ramble about this kind of stuff, because that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is definitely the Defiance of Destiny tech, the Profane Proxy, the little stuff that you might not otherwise notice if you're just going through quickly. And another example of this is flasks gain a charge every 3 seconds. Not that impactful, right? It's only 1 charge every 3 seconds. No, it's super impactful. You probably can't do the Pathfinder thing and perma-sustain your flasks off this alone, but it is going to ensure that your flasks are up more often when you need them, such as on boss fights. And a third of a charge a second is already pretty good when your flasks last, 10 seconds after you roll them. These aren't even rolled yet, which shows how early it is. By the way, by day 3, you should definitely roll your flasks. I would consider this to be a slight mistake, but keep in mind, I'm not here to flame people. That's not the point. I'm just bringing things up so that hopefully you don't make the mistake. And I'm going to be honest, I've made that mistake as well. So try to roll your flasks, get something like this. Doesn't have to be T1 or anything, just any sort of usable affixes, because flasks are really, really powerful, especially when you give them extra uptime. That 1/3, well, that's about a third of your flask uptime added by that chest piece. So I would definitely consider it if you don't have anything better like aura scaling. Next up, we have a steel champion, specifically splitting steel, which synergizes really, really well with the rework. The more projectiles you have, the more damage you have, and eventually the damage feels functionally infinite. Now you might have noticed that this build features an Ashes of the Stars, which previously was one of the rarest and most expensive items in Path of Exile. But if you saw my video on quality items, I said Ashes was one of the big losers of the gem changes, because before it was needed to complete skills. You'd get half of your conversion from the gem, and the other half from Ashes. Actually 40-60, but who's here to nitpick details? Now, skills are complete, therefore Ashes isn't as needed to play things, and thus I expected its price to drop. Sure enough, its price has dropped. As of when I'm recording and researching this video, on roughly the 6th day of the league, Ashes is sitting at about 5 divines. Certainly not cheap by any means, but at about, an eighth of a previous price? It's absolutely much more affordable than it's been in the past. I also like this setup because we've got a Perseverance. This is a great way to add a lot of damage and onslaught since you're permanently fortified by champion, while also scaling your defenses. So while this build might not have a lot of life, it has insane recovery, really good evasion, really good armor, and it must feel great to play. For weapons, we've got a Bell Timber Blade. I remember when this was people's best in slot, but then it kind of fell out of a meta and got completely forgotten about. It's because there are no skills that just hyper-effectively scaled off projectiles outside of Tornado Shot. And let's be honest, if you could use Bell Timber Blades and Tornado Shot, people would be doing it. But you can't, so we haven't seen it used for quite a while. But hey, Now, it's really good to see it come back into the meta. It's not super rare, though it's also not super common. Keep an eye out for it. Maybe keep it on your filter. Oh, and consider tossing a Corrupt on because it can get some very spicy things. Having all of this scaling means that flat damage is extremely valuable, such as from the Splitting Steel Gem. And the Splitting Steel Gem being able to split towards 5 targets and split without hitting a target makes it super powerful. You have great AoE coverage, insane damage, and honestly, this is a skill to watch because I suspect it's going to be one of the meta league starters for many leagues going forwards. All you need to do is worry about your defenses because damage is pretty much going to be infinite. And that's where Perseverance comes in, letting you use defenses to scale your damage. Last up, we've got a really nice tincture here. The chance to gain rage when you hit an enemy, at least from my own personal testing, doesn't really seem to have a very long internal cooldown. I'm sure it has some sort of cooldown, because otherwise loops and bad things happen. But it doesn't seem to be very long. Maybe it's 100 milliseconds. You can get a ton of rage. You'll have very good berserk uptime. As we're going to see somewhere in here, there's a berserk gem. Found it. And that feels really, really, really strong. So if you're playing any sort of build that is an attack-based character, which can hit, look out for an tincture, any type, with the outraged prefix, where you can gain rage on hit. Oh, and if you were nostalgia for steel skills or just wanted to play something different, because this is one of a few league starters that did extremely well, that hasn't been meta in an incredibly long time. I mean, Splitting Steel Champion was meta in the past, but that was like 2 steel skill reworks ago, which was around the Legion era. So odds are a lot of people haven't played it or haven't played it in a very long time. And from what I've seen of just watching a couple people play, it looks buttery smooth to clear maps, and the single target, quite frankly, is terrifying. We'll see if this gets any nerfs going into the next league. If not, it's going to be one of the top starters to watch for whatever 324 brings. And last up, a new Transfigured Gem, Scourge Arrow of Menace. Now, before the league started, I thought that Caustic Arrow of Poison was going to be incredible, because it was one of the early revealed gems, and it had really good numbers. As it turns out, GGG was kind of holding out on us, because in many ways, Scourge Arrow of Menace is even better. Now, it does lose to Caustic Arrow in certain situations, such as when you have exactly 4 projectiles, but it beats it in many other situations, such as when you don't need things like Greater Volley. This version is using Wilma's Requital, and those helmet sockets are open for a reason, to get the nice juicy 50% all-res to make the early gearing easier. While you may notice a trend right now as you're playing around day 6, 7, or 8 of people using charms with the Primalist, early on Magi was very dominant because these bonuses were a great way to get things like movement speed and of course resistances. When playing Wilma's Requital, the goal is to double dip with attack and cast speed. So, Frenzy charges give attack and cast speed. Onslaught gives attack and cast speed. The Says increases and reductions to cast speed applied to attack speed. So it really gives attack speed, and yes, it does double dip exactly like you think. Combine this with the higher damage range on elemental bows, being far, far superior to what we had before with Darkscorn, at least damage-wise. Defensively, Darkscorn is still way better. And while the easy ways to scale Ballista, or Ballistae, or Ballistae, correct me down below if you know how to actually fully pronounce that word, my Latin is atrocious. And well, you get a really powerful build. This is kind of similar to what I've been playing personally. The main difference is that mine was not ballista focused. Instead, I really wanted to go self-attack. I used them for a while on my day 3 video, which you can find linked up below, or up in the card and down below. I did use them, but more recently I've transitioned fully into self-attack. Unfortunately, there's a problem here. That problem is called lag. You'll get a lot of performance issues due to the number of projectiles, especially with returning projectile support. I don't know if they have a 4090 Ti, or I'm just somehow doing it wrong with my graphic settings, but I have had a lot of lag. And something else that I want to call out here, you'll notice that there's pretty scuffed gear in a lot of places. That's because you don't need all that much damage if you're doing the Wilma's Requital scaling. You get so much attack and cast speed, which translates into so much attack speed, that you kind of naturally scale your damage. All you really need to do is worry about staying alive. And luckily, with things like Lightning Coil, and a setup that I'm going to be talking about in a future video, get subscribed for that, staying alive is pretty darn easy this league as well. So if you wanted to try a new skill, well, this is one of the many brand new skills that are not only viable, but incredibly strong in Affliction League. And personally, I would definitely recommend playing something like this, because I don't know when we're going to do LE Damage Can Poison again. We had it in Crucible, then it went away, now it's come back. Does this mean GG is going to add it permanently soon? Or does it mean it's going to be gone for good, never to return, because it's just way too OP? But either way, that was a quick look at some of the most successful League starters from Affliction League. Next up, in currency news, I wanted to talk quickly about how the Viridian Wildwood affects farming. And I knew no better person to ask about this than Grimro, so that's exactly what I did. He spent quite a bit of time testing all the wisps and what's the best League mechanics to combine with Affliction League. So I'm going to go over things quickly, but if you want to know more, you can check out the full article over at Maxwell GG after it releases, or maybe check out Grim's channel as well. He might have some updates there. First up, what are some of the best mechanics to farm with Affliction? Well, going things like Wandering Path or getting possessed monsters are good because you want as many loot multipliers as you can get. The monsters spawned by Harbingers can be inhabited by wisps and gain all the bonuses associated with this. Therefore, Harbingers are a great way to add rare monsters to your maps, and the enemies they spawn aren't as tanky as other mechanics on this list, so they're a great starting place. Plus, you get flask charges, explosions, and on-kill effects. But if you want even more rare monsters, then specialize into Abyss. This mechanic is especially potent when combined with Affliction due to the loot multiplier on Abyssal rares. Empowered Abyss monsters are more difficult to handle than Harbingers, but if your build is up to the challenge, this is by far the best because Wild Wisps add additional projectiles to the monsters they empower. And the monsters spawning mini abysses from the Stygian Spires count as projectiles for whatever reason. Just keep in mind that this might be hotfixed in the near future, so keep an eye out for that because it might not still be true. Legion, Beyond, and Delirium are also incredibly rewarding when empowered by wisps, but they're equally dangerous. So if you have a very strong build, consider farming these, but for most people they're probably going to be too rippy, especially this early in the league. You're really going to need a full endgame build, i.e. something that could do, let's just say 80% Delirious, before you'll be even remotely comfortable farming these mechanics. And lastly, I'm going to give Blight an honorable mention here, because it's not as impactful as some of the others. However, you can still get a massive number of empowered normal monsters, which results in things like Anointed Jewelry dropping from a pump at the end. Use an oil extractor to get the most valuable things like golden oils. In terms of color, pink or wild is generally the best if you're juicing, since the rarity bonus is bonkers and interacts very interestingly with other mechanics that give rarity bonuses. You remember the loot goblins from Arch Nemesis that turned everything into divines? Yeah, pretty much the same thing here. You'll get more rare divination cards, winged scarabs, and tier 1 currency items. On the other hand, Primal is the best wisp for low investment and solo mapping. That's blue for anyone who doesn't have the names memorized, which is most people, myself included. If you can only get one color as a solo player, always aim for blue. It adds a chance for all empowered monsters to drop currency items. Personally, I've dropped 2 or 3 divines in maps just from having this on. And it includes non-basic currencies like the Eldritch currencies. Last up, Vivid by itself is underwhelming. You really shouldn't aim for Vivid just on its own, but it has great synergy with the others, and ideally you want to go with all 3. Then, whenever you encounter one of the vendors, you should always check them. If you have something like the trade macro, you can use it to price check all the charms and tinctures you encounter. For the Breaker of Oaths, check his corpses. Look for perfect corpses as these sell quite well. Imperfect corpses, others with flaws, not really that good and probably won't sell for too much. But of course, those are just some quick thoughts from early on in Affliction League. As the league progresses, we'll definitely find out more both on the build meta and how to make the most currency. So be sure to stay tuned, and if you want to read up on more mechanics, then head over to Maxwell GG and check out the full article. And so now I'm curious, how did your league start go, and are you still playing your starter build? If so, let me know what it is down below. And if not, let me know what the most exciting and cool transfigured build is that you're looking forward to or maybe just swapped into. Of course, if you want something else to watch, I've recommended several things throughout this video, but personally I'd recommend checking out my Day 3 video where you can check my character's progress, especially if Scourge of Menace interests you at all. With that said, I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this possible. Link to support is also down below. With that said, thanks for watching. That's all from me today. I have to get back to getting hit by empowered monsters. Luckily, I did manage to find a defensive layer that's strong enough they can't break through, but oh boy did that take a lot of experimentation. Don't worry, if you stay tuned, a video on that's coming out soon. But for now, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again for that video in the future.